in Scotland. And welcome to the 8th in our exciting lineup of QI Connect WebEx sessions in 2016. In fact, the 27th since the series began. You'll recall that QI Connect provides an opportunity for colleagues across health and social care and beyond to learn from international leaders in the field of improvement, innovation and integration. We've designed these sessions to be short, accessible and recorded to allow access at a time that suits everyone, and reuse also. And just to introduce you to the WebEx functionality, good afternoon, Jennifer.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session. So I just have a couple of quick housekeeping slides just to get us started, tips for a successful WebEx. If you could please use the chat.
How you put this on?
Please use the chat function that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'll talk you through this in just a moment. And if you do have any technical difficulties, such as not being able to hear the presenter speak, or if you keep losing connection, please message the event manager using the chat function or by pressing *0 on your telephone keypad. So, these sessions are designed to be an interactive, fun learning experience. So we do encourage you to use the chat function to share any questions, comments or ideas through the talk, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session. We will also be sharing hyperlinks within the chat function to any resources mentioned by our speakers today, and we'll be circulating that to everyone afterwards. So we did say it's going to be a fun interactive session, so we're really keen to find out where you're all joining us today from. So in a moment we're just going to be asking you to click on the country you're joining us from on a map, but if you could just click on the annotation icon that you can just see there circled in red, and then click on the arrow, again circled in red there, and then get ready and click on the map. So where are you joining us today from? Welcome to everyone joining us from Scotland. Oh, hi Tom.
Yeah, it's great to see so many QI connectors joining us. Good afternoon in Sheffield, Tom. Catherine, you look as though you're in the North Sea. I hope it's not too cold where you are. Welcome, Paul. We'll just wait for a moment. Some of our other colleagues will be joining as well. It takes a little bit of time. It's great to see you all joining and being interactive. Catherine's now showing us some additional functions of WebEx. Excellent.
That's great, thank you.
Good, it's great to see so many people here. Jennifer, thanks very much for that introduction to WebEx. And Jennifer, as we see more and more people joining, which is absolutely super, we're now going to take a little look and just remind ourselves of QI Connect itself. We're now delighted to say that we've got 456 organisations who are registering for QI Connect. We're absolutely delighted with that growth, and you'll see in a moment the diversity of QI connectors. But before we do that, QI connectors far and wide are drawn here, thanks Alex, are drawn here because of the big competition. The big competition, of course, is that we would like you to identify one of the flags of our QI connector countries. We now have 47 countries joining QI Connect, and I'm going to call out the name of one of those countries, and the first one to put their arrow on the flag wins a big prize. And today's country is Saudi Arabia. Whoa, well done, Paul. Well done, Paul. You got there first, followed by Alistair and Jackie and Tom. But Paul Marley, congratulations on identifying Saudi Arabia as the flag for this week's QI Connector. And a big prize is this mug. So the mug will be winging its way to you over in Ireland just shortly. Thanks very much, folks, and thanks to all of our organisations that are joining QI Connect on a regular basis. As you know, we started off with one slide on these organisations with your beautiful logos on them, and we're now reaching 12 and 13 slides with the organisations themselves. Absolutely fantastic to see the reach and the diversity of our QI connectors. And of course, we're always delighted that we're reaching all of the parts of NHS Scotland, looking after our 5.3 million population here. So welcome everyone in NHS Scotland that's joining us today. And we always do a shout out to the universities. We now have 42 universities that join QI Connect, register and join QI Connect on a regular basis. And a big shout out to my alma mater, Glasgow University, with Glasgow University joining us for the first time on today's QI Connect. And a special shout out to the new organisations who are joining for the first time, and delighted that Tom and the team are joining us from Sheffield Teaching Hospitals. Hi Tom, saying hello again, and a big shout out to our friends both at University of Glasgow and in Saudi Arabia. So welcome aboard all our colleagues who are joining us from across the world. And of course our colleagues here and abroad can reuse our recordings. This is our colleagues in Ko Awatena in New Zealand, who regularly use our recordings of QI Connect for their learning together. And all of those recordings are freely available on our now quite extensive QI Connect library here at Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And a big shout out, as always, to the International Society for Quality in Healthcare, who use the QI Connect series as an approved resource within the ISQA Fellowship Programme. We're always delighted with the colleagues joining us there. And of course, a shout out to the small but perfectly formed QI Connect team here at Healthcare Improvement Scotland. You've heard from Jennifer, Ross Stewart, who runs all the administration and will be in touch with your certification after the programme today. And of course, Alex, who's expanding our international reach on Twitter. That's your team working together here to provide QI Connect. I'm delighted to have Gavin Lavery join us today. Gavin will be asking the first question of our speaker. Gavin's the Clinical Director at the Health Safety Forum in Northern Ireland, in the Public Health Agency there, and Gavin is also a intensive care and critical care specialist there, and a very good friend of QI Connect and NHS Scotland. So remember, always tweet throughout and after. Grateful to Alex for expanding our reach on Twitter, but please reach out to your Twitter friends. Excellent. The hashtag is on the screen. However, that brings us on to today's exciting episode of QI Connect. Our QI Connect speaker today has a fascinating contribution to our theme of innovation and integration. He has worked across many industries in studying what makes successful market-leading organisations, and he has shared his thinking with organisations ranging as diverse as the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, the Institute of Medicine, and now, of course, all of our QI connectors here on QI Connect. Steve Spear is a 4-time winner of the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence and a Harvard Business Review McKinsey Award winner for his article on Fixing Healthcare from the Inside Today. He's an accomplished author of the award-winning and critically acclaimed books Chasing the Rabbit and The High Velocity Edge, amongst a range of other publications. With an economics degree from Princeton, an engineering master's from MIT, and a doctorate from the Harvard Business School, he's obviously very well able to engage with QI Connect, and we're looking forward to hearing from Steve today. Good afternoon, Steve.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
Very well indeed, Steve. We're very grateful to you joining QI Connect, and we're going to be asking you to, I'm just handing over the ball so that you can share your desktop with us here at QI Connect.
Great. All right, give me one moment.
Sure. Where are you joining us from today, Steve?
I'm sitting in the lovely town of Brookline, abutting Boston.
Lovely. Well, as you saw from the earlier slides, we have QI connectors from all over the UK and indeed all over the world. So we're delighted that you can join us from Brookline today.
Great. Anyway, if it's all right, I'll get rolling here. I've got a bunch of slides. I'll do a little foreshadowing about what we have. And the one thing I encourage everyone to do is I'm a native New Yorker. So as a result, I live in Boston, which has a similar social dynamic. We are used to being interrupted. So if I go more than a minute or two or three where you haven't thrown something in the chat box for Brian to channel towards me, I will be concerned that we drop the connection. So anyway, keep the questions coming. If you're interested in the slides, you know, obviously as was said, this session will be posted. If you want the slide deck itself, there's a way to get them. I put it in the chat box now. But anyway, if that's all right, I'll get rolling now?
Thanks very much, Steve. Sounds good.
Great. So by a bit of self-introduction, and very little, because more of my personal history will come out as I go through the slides, my work is focused, in putting this in very academic, nerdy terms, has focused on a phenomenon which is the ability of a very few number of organizations to deliver far more value into the marketplace, do it much more quickly with greater volume variety than is typical in their field, and do it with much greater ease than is typical also when they compared to their counterparts, rivals, and that sort of thing. And while that statement, more value, more quickly, more easily, is fast and quick to say, it actually has some really profound implications. And I'll get to this as I go through the presentation, is that we typically think of making things better at the expense of somebody else. It's a win-lose world, zero-sum, that kind of thing. We want to expand capacity, for example. There has to be some great cost to it. We have to improve quality. It has to come at the expense of something else, greater attentiveness or overburden on the part of staff. This capacity of certain organizations to deliver more value more quickly, more easily, means that it's win-win for all stakeholders. Better experience by customers or patients or beneficiaries, better experience on the part of those delivering a product, a service, a condition to others, done more effectively, more efficiently. So for those bearing the cost of provision, it's less of a burden on them. It's win-win. So as we go through this, I want you to, or I encourage you, to have a very optimistic view of the lessons extracted out of these high-velocity organizations and how it might apply in your organization. Because if you actually are able to do these things in practice, if you're able to do these things in practice, you're able to make a promise and deliver on that promise to all stakeholders that things will be better for everybody. Typically, we think of that kind of promise as being something in the domain of fairy tales, but this, in fact, is part of the reality of these high-velocity organizations. In terms of setting up my presentation, I'll do a little bit about the operating environment in which so many organizations work, a little bit about the disparity between these great performers and the rest, and then anchor into what the mechanics are, in a sense, the causality that allows this phenomenon of more value, more quickly, more easily to occur. So anyway, that's kind of the setup. Brian, just real quick before I start flipping through, any questions that have come up so far?
Not so far, Steve, but I'll keep you posted.
Fantastic. So I'm going to show two slides. First slide here is someone, I think it was an actual hack. I think it was deliberate. The slide is not a satellite photo of evening illumination. You know, of course, that wouldn't make sense. Both the East Coast of the United States, the West Coast, and Europe all lit up at the same time. What you're seeing is Internet activity. And the reason I put this up is that what you see is very intense activity in much of the developed world all the time. And so what this indicates, and what we'll see with the next slide, is Well, anyway, I'll show you the next slide. Now, this, I'll tell you in a moment what this is, but I encourage you all to think about what are these.
Oops. How are you doing there, Steve? We've just temporarily lost Steve.
I've never known that to happen before.
How are we doing? Steve Spear?
What's that?
Okay, we've temporarily lost Steve, so we'll just get Steve on his mobile phone. QI connectors, stay with us at the moment. As you were hearing Steve introduce, the world is getting smaller and more connected. I think that's where the theme was going at the moment. And just while we're waiting for Jennifer to get hold of Steve, we will just reflect a little bit. We've got a slight issue with the technology also. So, Tracy, if you're on the call, Jennifer's just sent you a little message on that. And QI connectors, just stay with us. Normal service will be resumed just shortly. I think what we'll be finding in Steve's talk is a consideration of what works in other industries and also a bit of reflection of what happens in healthcare and how it's working. And if you haven't already taken a quick look at his Chasing the Rabbit book, it looks at and reinventing healthcare delivery. He's written an article for the Health Foundation. We'll post all this on the chat box in a moment. And also his latest book, The High Velocity Edge. And we're particularly delighted that Tom Downs, Professor Tom Downs from Sheffield University Teaching Hospitals is on the call today. Tom's done a lot of work with Steve over the years, and we're delighted with that. We're just waiting for the call to be reconnected at the moment. Let me just check what's happening. Tracy, are you on the call from BT? Just waiting for Tracy to say hello.
Mr. Spear has joined back in.
I am back in. Hey, very sorry about that. So you've been staring at blank screens. I've been flipping back and forth, and I hope I've created no sort of seizure activity from all the flashing lights like strobe.
Welcome back, Steve. I've just been filling in a little bit, and good to have you both back. So, Steve, I'll let you you've just been talking about the internet activity just before we lost you.
Yeah, so what I want to say is that this notion that certain organizations create substantial advantage and really differentiate themselves in terms of their ability to bring value to market quickly and easily. The point of these two slides is that there really shouldn't be all that much differentiation. In an era where ideas, finances, people, and materials can move from anywhere to anywhere nearly instantaneously, one would think that it's a pretty level playing field. But the reality is it's not. And I'm going to give you some examples of the staggering differences between those who are best and those who are not. So anyway, this is an example. My roots go back to looking at the auto industry nearly 20 years ago. And for the very simple reason that Toyota had absolutely decimated the big three through the 1980s. And I appreciate that for many people, the auto industry is considered a passe situation now where most people don't pay much attention to it. I think largely because most of us are so used to being able to buy high-quality product at fair price that we forget that the ability to deliver high-quality product at fair price consistently is really quite miraculous. But anyway, let me just show this, that even in the auto industry, which gets far less attention these days, there's enormous disparity between the best and the rest. So what you see in this slide is a comparison of at least some of the product lineup of Ford and Toyota, which are the #1 and #2 automakers in the world. And without doing a detailed study, you'll notice that there's a substantial commonality in terms of in every segment in which one offers a product, there's a competitor offering product there also. Now, that said, despite that competition at every point across the spectrum. Toyota, when it sells a car for something, it makes a profit of something like $2,700 per unit. Ford is number 2 in the world at about $1,000 per unit. You see Fiat Chrysler less than that, General Motors beyond that. And I continue to milk this joke. And the reason we don't have Volkswagen on this list is they're still cooking the books. So there may be a silent laugh or a silent groan somewhere amongst the listeners, but you have these enormous disparities. Now, again, these disparities aren't just on a corporate level, they're on a particular product level. So here's another example of level playing field, but with very different outcomes. So in the case of the world auto market, about 20 years ago, it sent a very strong signal to automakers that it wanted a substantial increase in fuel economy. And everyone heard that signal or received that signal. Everyone came up with precisely the same answer, which was this idea of hybridization, putting an electric motor with an internal combustion engine, regenerative braking, coupling that together, coordinating it with some sophisticated engineered software, and introducing a product. And so General Motors introduced the Chevy Volt, and Toyota introduced the Toyota Prius. Now, again, same problem, same answer. But the thing about Toyota was they got their product out the door 10 years in advance of the Chevy Volt. And the thing about having a 10-year head start is that Chevy has stole the Chevy Volt. Toyota has put its own product through 6 generations of innovation and put its technology on 21 different platforms. So whereas the Chevy Volt has sold something like 90,000 units since it's been introduced, Toyota's hybrid drive system is up to 7 million copies and counting, a difference in the results of 80 to 1. Now, I just want to come back to where we started this conversation about more value to market, quicker, easier, and an 80 to 1 ratio of performance certainly fits within that scheme of more value, more quickly, more easily. So continuing on with examples, this is not a phenomenon limited to the auto industry. So in the world for consumer electronics, Apple competes with everybody when they're selling smartphones, and because of the intensity of the competition, they sell only 1 smartphone out of 5, 20% of the market. But because of Apple's ability to bring and capture value and get it quickly into the marketplace, they sell 1 phone out of 5, but they make 92% of the market profit. And they have done that consistently on successive generations of consumer electronics technology. The other example I want to bring up is when we go back inside from the consumer electronics to electronics that end up inside. We just marked the 50th anniversary of Gordon Moore and Moore's Law. And Moore's Law was the declaration that microprocessor performance would double at an exponential rate every 18 to 24 months. Now, the thing about this industry, like the auto industry, like the consumer electronics industry, it's intensely competitive in terms of having common access to suppliers and common access to customers and common clarity as to what the suppliers can provide and the customers need. That said, as you can see in the upper left hand of this diagram, that every major change in computer architecture, from desktops to data centers on and on, that Intel starts off with a fairly small market share relative to everyone else, and that certainly makes sense because everyone is still trying to figure out what problem they're solving in the market space and trying to figure out how to solve that problem. But because Intel, as it turns out, is the only manufacturer of microprocessors to adhere to Moore's Law, with this ability to exponentially grow processor speed and processor performance, you see the huge dominance they have in each successive generation of computing technology. So currently, we're now in the era of data centers and the data cloud and that sort of thing. And data centers are designed with an idea towards processing speed but low cost. And it turns out because Intel is so much faster to deliver value to market than anybody else, they have about 90-some-odd% of that market space compared to their competitors. So but before we move, and just one last example, as we move from the world of manufactured products like autos to the world of high-tech designed and manufactured products like microprocessors, I just want to offer that this is not limited to the competitive commercial space. And so as one more example, you know, back in the 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union got into a competition to put nuclear power on board warships for a whole variety of different reasons. Again, similar problem, trying to harness similar technology for similar purposes. The results of those two efforts are wildly different. So the picture you have here on your screen now is the USS Nautilus, which was launched just about 60 years ago. And since its launch, the U.S. experience with nuclear power on board submarines, aircraft carriers, and other warships has been perfect in the sense that no one has ever been injured due to a reactor failure, nor has there ever been environmental damage due to a reactor failure. The Soviet Union, it's sort of like the GM of world navies, tried to do exactly the same thing for exactly the same reason. But when you look through naval records, this is a picture of the wreckage of the Kursk, that on about a 2- or 3-year clip, the Soviet Navy has lost a submarine precisely because of their inability to control the reactors in a perfectly safe way. So anyway, these examples, and obviously I'm going to tie this back to healthcare, but these examples run amok, is that there are few examples within a sector, but many sectors are characterized by these high-velocity organizations which were much quicker to bring value out in the first place and consistently are much quicker to bring value out as they succeed. And I just want to make a transition in terms of how stories like this are received. So it's not uncommon for me to talk about, you know, Steve Jobs, you know, obviously the founder and genius who motivated Apple, Hyman Rickover, who was the admiral who was, birthed the U.S. nuclear Navy experience, and Gordon Moore, and then the fellow in the upper right-hand corner is one of the fellows credited with creating the Toyota system of management. And when I tell these stories, the reaction I often get when I explain these gigantic disparities on very large scale with very complex things is a level of excitement which is comparable to when I get home to have dinner with my teenagers and I try to explain to them what I did today. Now, I'm going to make a transition right now from the world where I have my roots, the industrial world, the technology world, into your world. I was giving a presentation. Actually, Brian, before I make this transition, just want to see if any questions have accumulated that I should be addressing now.
Yeah, I guess one that might work here, Steve, is one from David Grayson, who is the otolaryngologist and ENT surgeon in New Zealand and leads the safety work in New Zealand and is awake in New Zealand as we speak.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, and David's a very regular QI connector. David asks, is high velocity more important than high reliability?
The answer is one depends on the other, and I'll plant this seed. Think about the immune system, which is in a healthy person a highly reliable system, and one which depends on tremendous velocity of seeing pathogens early and addressing them quickly in order to give the appearance of reliability. So anyway, I'm using that as an analogy and a foreshadowing to emphasize the point that the high reliability, high velocity is a dynamic experience and not a static one. There are, by my count, no systems which are reliable only in their static structure. That systems are reliable based on the dynamics. And again, I'm venturing deeply from the things I know into things you all know in terms of referring to immune system and other kinds of health and well-being in biological systems, but certainly in technical systems. Technical systems typically are not resilient in their ability to absorb disruption, based on their static structure. It's typically a characteristic dependent on very high-speed dynamics to detect aberration and to respond to it. So anyway, great question. The two concepts are related to each other. The connection, the relation is, or the hook, is the issue of dynamics, and I'll start talking about the dynamics in just a moment. So thank you for the question, and very well timed. Anything else before I proceed?
No, I think with the others we can bring in a bit later on. So thanks, folks. Keep the questions coming. Thanks, Steve.
Outstanding. Thank you. So anyway, the slide I have in front of you is actually quite reflective of my professional experience of spending some 20 years explaining the huge performance advantages of companies like Toyota, Apple, Intel, the U.S. Navy, and talking into your community, the healthcare community, and getting a reaction of like, well, ho-hum, what's the big deal? We don't make cars. And so over the last few months, I've kind of shifted the conversation a little bit. And I'll put the question to you. If you start thinking through these organizations, which are able to deliver much more value more quickly, more easily into the marketplace. And again, I want to emphasize this is not just the repetitive manufacturing of putting a bolt, putting a nut on a bolt to tighten things, but this is way upstream in the very creative, intellectual, cognitive world of designing things and developing new sciences and that sort of thing. You had an opportunity to walk into two facilities. Oh, here's the setup. I'm going to give you the opportunity to walk into two facilities. One facility, I'm not going to tell you which one, is the one that's characterized by extraordinary performance. And the other one is more typical in that they deliver less value, they deliver that value less easily, and they do it less quickly than the one who's the outstanding one. And I'm giving you 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to go into one, 10 minutes to go in the other, and after those 20 minutes, you come out and you have to be, with great confidence, be able to say, I know which one is the high performer, and I know which one is typical. So I'm going to take 10, 15 seconds to think about what would you look for. And again, you only have 10 minutes in each. Now, as you're thinking this through, if you want to fill up the chat box with some suggestions, that would be fine. So now let me offer this before we start talking about the high performer and the low performer. Or the high performer, let's talk about the low performer and the experience we all have, which is if people struggle on a daily basis to deliver value. So there's a struggle, so it's not easy, and the delivery of value is somewhat slow. I think what we all know is that if we look inside those facilities, what we see is people, there's a good word, chatter, that there's a confusion, there's an awkwardness. Even way upstream in the esoteric high end of designing and developing brand new things, people not doing that work directly but saying, where's that chemical I need? I had this experience at a pharmaceutical company. We spent a good 10 minutes looking around for sodium carbonate, I think, to run a reaction. Couldn't be found. Where are those instructions? Where are those forms? Where's the data I need? And what you see is a tremendous amount of awkwardness. And certainly in the world of doing physical work, you see this. People going this way and that way, trying to track down the things they need to do their work, but not actually doing the work. And so if what is characteristic of many organizations is day-to-day awkwardness in the execution of their activities, then what must be the case with these ones that deliver more value more quickly, more easily, is that if you went inside, what you would see is gracefulness. That it's almost as if by magic or incredible choreography, that when someone goes to do something, everything they need is there at their fingertips. And it's almost like the Zen-like channeling of ideas and information and instructions and guidance, that everything happens with perfect fluidity. All right, so that's one part, that the places which are outstanding are extraordinarily graceful as opposed to awkward. Now the flip side, and then let's keep going with this, is that what might we expect? Again, we have just a few minutes at the moment of exchange. It's where perhaps one engineer gives the work that she's been working on and hands it off to another engineer. It could be someone who's doing market research and hands that information off to someone who's going to act on that. It could be someone who's made something physical, and hands it to the person who's actually going to put that thing to good use. It's that moment of transaction between the person who's done effort to create something valuable and the person who's the recipient, the beneficiary of that effort. And you start thinking through what one might see. And with organizations that don't do their work all that well, what you see is disappointment. Like, oh man, is that the room I'm checking into? Oh man, you know, is that the thing I have to drive? Oh man, is that the thing you expect me to eat? Oh man, is that the information from which I have to draw sense? Oh man, is that how you're going to treat me? So, you know, publicly. So there's that disappointment element. And in places then that generate such outstanding value as perceived by their beneficiaries, the internal execution is graceful, and through that gracefulness what they do is they generate enormous amounts of gratitude. Now, let me make the case for gratitude and gracefulness as things to hook on and try to manage. Because I imagine when I first started asking you questions about things to look for when you went into two facilities, things you might have listed were productivity, quality, safety, reliability, all these different measures. And out of fairness, those are all important things, but they're all incredibly hard to see. So for example, productivity, I can't see productivity. What I can see is things being made, which I count. I can see my watch, which I start and stop, and then I can see the calculation I do to figure out how many things I made in the time allotted. If I want to see quality, I can't actually see quality. I can see things which I inspect and tabulations I make to see how well things are defect-free or not. So most of the things we typically measure are things we actually can't manage. We can count them, we can calculate them, but they're all aggregated and they're all after the fact. And as far as gratitude and gratefulness, that we can see in the moment. Now let me give you a very particular example. So I live in the Boston area. One of our local academic medical centers was agitating that they needed to expand their emergency department. And this is a little bit frustrating to read and hear because they expanded their emergency department about 5 years ago and spent $500 million to do so. So for them to say now that they have to expand again because they're at capacity is like, well, why didn't it get right the first time? Now let me point out about the notion of expansion. So when this idea of expanding the emergency department was presented publicly, it was all explained in very altruistic terms about meeting the needs of the community, meeting the needs of the community better, so on and so on. But here's the thing, is that the expansion was a zero-sum proposition. And here's what I mean by that, is that if you're going to spend $500 million to expand again an emergency department, it means that $500 million is not going to meet some other societal need. So someone wins, someone loses. If you're going to expand the emergency department, during the period of construction, there will be disruption to patients and staff who have to deal with the noise and the dust and the disruption of the construction. There is a winner, there is a loser. So expansion, and then if you're going to expand the emergency department, it means encroaching on the local community, which is already densely populated. There is a winner, there is a loser. So I had an opportunity to visit this emergency department with a doctor friend. We'll call him Dr. Ben for the purpose of this conversation. I said, Dr. Ben, you know, is it really true you guys have to expand? And we walk into the emergency department. It's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And wouldn't you know, the place appears to be at capacity. It's crowded. He says, see, this is why we have to expand. I said, well, let's take a closer look. Now, I'm looking through the lens not of safety, productivity, quality, efficiency. I'm looking through the lens of gratitude from gracefulness. So first thing we do is there's a young woman who's just almost floating through the hallways, looking as much like this ballerina, just coasting through the hallways. And I said to Dr. Ben, hey, I noticed she's wearing brown scrubs. I've seen blue, purple, green, other colored scrubs, but I don't know what brown scrubs means. What is her job here? And Dr. Ben mutters a little bit and says, well, she doesn't actually work here. So well, if she doesn't work here, why is she wearing scrubs? She says, oh, well, the reason she's wearing brown scrubs is she's a psych patient. And when psych patients get here, we put them in brown scrubs so we can tell they're a psych patient. And now here's the thing about this gratitude, is that in the moment she looked fine and content, and she was just sort of ambulating around the unit. But you have to believe an hour ago, she was not in such a happy state, which is why she or a family member had her admitted to the emergency department for observation and some type of control. But here she was, because the place was so at capacity, she wasn't in a room where the risk she presented to herself and others was diminished. She was just out and about in these brown scrubs, dancing around. Now we continued our walkthrough, and again, it was another 2 minutes. There's a young woman, maybe 20, 25, sitting slumped over in one of those jogger strollers, an adult-sized jogger stroller, not a regular wheelchair, a jogger stroller. So I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, well, the jogger stroller in adult size says that she's got some ongoing chronic condition. The fact that she's in the emergency department means that something emerged which made her condition more of greater concern to her parents, which is why her parents brought her here today. But no one's paying any attention to her. Her parents, her dad's got a death grip on the handlebar of this jogger stroller with his right hand. On the other side, the mom's got a death grip on the handlebars with her left hand, and they're looking so terribly anxious because there's their daughter slumped over in this wheelchair, and no one's paying any attention to her. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, which is right then, right there, my Dr. Ben friend could say, well, it's really a shame for them that they're at the back of the queue, that other patients are here with higher priority, higher urgency, and it's because we're so pressed at capacity that the psych patient and this young woman in the wheelchair are not getting attention. I said, all right, well, let's entertain that hypothesis for a moment. We know we have at least 2 patients where they and their families are not in a position to express complete, perfect, untarnished gratitude. Now let's find out why. So then we started looking around to find out what the clinical staff was doing. And so we went into a room where there were doctors sitting around trying to understand the newly installed electronic medical record. And I'm not fooling. There was one doctor who slammed his notes down, shoved the keyboard out of the way, and he said, you know what, this thing is so hard to use, I'm retiring today. I was going to wait 6 months, but I am done with it. And he stormed out. And then there were other doctors cursing, because of the amount of time required, or because they were losing their files and their field. So we looked at the doctors, then we started looking for the nurses, and we started following, just for a minute or two, nurses are doing their work, and what they were doing is looking for stuff. Where are the forms? Where are the information? Where are the patients? Oh, where'd that cart go, which normally has medications? It's not where it normally is. Where's that equipment I need to sonogram, cardiac monitoring, whatever else it is? Where'd that equipment go? An ambulance arrived, and the EMTs, they came bounding out and, heroically, pulled a patient on a gurney, out the back of the ambulance, came barreling in, like out of any medical drama on TV, to come up and say, where do patients go? And as we started looking for gracefulness, we started counting the number of clinicians who, in that moment that we looked at them, were actually doing something directly contributing to value for a patient. And it was 1 out of 10. 1 out of 10. 90% of the clinicians were doing something else to try and restabilize the system in order to be able to do their actual work. And so then I turned to Dr. Ben, and I said, look, I think we can conclude that at least some patients here have little reason to have perfect gratitude for the experience they're having right now. But it's not a capacity problem. It's a gracefulness problem. Is that the system in which these clinicians are embedded is so awkwardness producing that none of these clinicians have an ability to express fully their professional aptitude and their professional potential. So anyway, let me just pause there, because we'll talk about how to resolve for the gratitude gracefulness gap. But I just want to see what this prompted. So Brian, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. And we've had a number of comments, actually. So Stuart Ferguson, who's a clinical leadership fellow with Scottish Government, and also Christina Ryan, also a Scottish clinical leadership fellow with the National Education Board, were both making comments around you know, how much gratitude do we see or show in our everyday work, but also to the wider description of Dr. Ben's environment. They were very much resonating with them. Stuart's got a background as an EMP as well, I think, as well as being a qualified doctor. So he's experienced there. So a lot of resonance there. But one of the points that was raised, you know, do we actually measure experience or person-centeredness or staff outcomes or gratitude?
Well, I'll leave the question about measurement back to people to reflect on their own organization.
Yeah.
Let me just offer this, and the challenge I gave to this Dr. Ben is that, yes, you can measure for a large population, let's say gratitude, be a patient or a staff, you can measure gratitude, you know, periodically. And that's fine, and I guess that's good for making reports and, you know, showing that you're adhering to certain standards. But if you're trying to manage an organization, you don't have to do all this calculated heavy lifting reporting. You can just stand someplace for a few minutes and look around and say, wow, that person is having difficulty, awkwardness. What can I do, what can we do to make that more graceful? That person over there looks disappointed. What can we do to investigate that, to understand the source of that disappointment and how we can convert it to gratitude? So I'll tell you what, Brian, I've got a bunch more slides, and I'm happy to share them with people. I think what I'd like to do is, you guys set me up with a question very early on about what can you do to get started. And what I want to offer is, let me jump to my very, very last slide, and then if for questions I can elaborate. But let me just foreshadow is that what you can do to get started is do what you do every day with your patients and start doing it with your colleagues. And so let me get through the slides, and if it's a little bit disturbing to see them flash through this way, I apologize, but I'll get past the Toyota stories and this, and start thinking, come back to the Alcoa story, it's in my book, you can read it. Let's get back to this, of how do you actually get gratitude and gracefulness as a common experience. So let me offer this, is that what you all were trained to do as clinicians is go to a situation, a patient, and understand the current condition, and do, you know, through history, examination, and workup. And then in the course of doing that workup, what you were trying to do is understand what about the patient was abnormal relative to normal. And I'll give my very pedestrian layperson, you know, is their blood pressure abnormally high or low, blood sugar high or low, oxygen saturation, blood or high or low, you know, different chemistry metrics, high or low. And the reason you try to do that so quickly is the fact that you have an abnormality is an indication that something inside the biological system that is a human being, something is occurring awkwardly as opposed to gracefully. And then when you've come up with your cataloging of different problems that are presenting themselves as evidence of internal awkwardness, you go through the process of differential diagnosis to try and come up with some kind of meaningful understanding of why those awkwardnesses, those biological awkwardnesses might be occurring, and the differential diagnosis goes from symptom presentation to possible causal factor. And so then that informs the development of a treatment plan which you can put in place, and when you put that treatment plan in place, you put it in place with a prognosis, an expectation that these treatments will address these causes which I've determined, and by addressing those causes, it'll convert the presentation of symptoms into a prognosis of an improved condition. And what you've learned to do clinically is constantly repeat this cycle. And for a patient who's got a chronic condition, you do it all the time. It's an ongoing process of seek out a problem, trying to explain and understand the problem, resolve the problem, try to resolve the problem. And to the question that came up earlier on, is that patients who you can restore to health, what you're doing is you're reestablishing their body's ability to see and solve problems with great rapidity. With the patients who you can't restore to health and who stay in a chronic condition, you actually superimpose this treatment infrastructure around the patient to see problems so that you know where and when and how to solve them. And so the admonition to clinicians is keep doing that good, solid, clinical, disciplined behavior, but take a step back and apply it to the system in which you're embedded, apply it onto the work your colleagues do, apply it onto the span of responsibility you have. So with one last slide, and you'll see with the somewhat jingoistic tone of it, you know, who's responsible for making systems healthy, that they have this dynamic like an immune system. This is your job. And back to the starting question of how to get started, the way to get started is go ask somebody, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? And actually, Brian, what do I got, about 3 minutes left?
Yeah, so Steve, we've got a few minutes left. We've got 5 minutes left. Steve, I wondered, we've got a couple of questions here, but I want to bring in Gavin Lavery, if that's okay.
Go ahead. I'll tell you what, let me click back on this slide and I'll tell you the anecdote that informs it. But yeah, go ahead.
Great. Gavin, welcome to QI Connect. How are you doing? And Gavin might not be there. You might be muted, Gavin. Okay, maybe not. Steve, let's go with your story.
Great. Okay, so I'll just finish this up. So I think there was a question early on, how do you get started? And my story building up to this is that what we're really concerned about is generating gratitude to the graceful execution of our tasks. That what we have to do in order to figure out how to be grateful is apply exactly the same discipline we do to understanding the source of patient problems and the creativity we apply towards generating treatment plans for them. We just have to do more of that onto the systems in which patients and clinicians are embedded. True story. We go out west to Los Angeles a bunch of years ago. They're concerned about patient misadventures. And wrong side surgery, mismedication, all sorts of things, sentinel events, which had greatly impacted patients and it impacted staff. So we're out there with the chief medical officer, a guy by the name of Neil Romanoff, and we start having this conversation with Neil about how complex systems really depend on this very, very rapid detection of problems, so that they can be seen and solved early on before they have a chance to snowball with an infectious, metastasizing-like effect. So Neil takes this to heart, and over the course of a couple of days, he starts making rounds. And whereas previously he would have been rounding only on patients, he starts rounding on systems. And his rounding goes something like this, which is he'll approach a clinician and say, hey, my name is Neil, who are you, what are you doing, why do you do it that way, and how are you doing it? And just like your conversation about a patient is about Mrs. Johnson and not about patients in general, he really tried to get the clinician to talk about the work that the person was in the moment. And after that description, the next question Neil asked was the assessment question, which is, well, the things you're doing, what's difficult? What's not working? And, you know, again, really trying to link into the very particulars of, I can't find this, this is inaccurate, this is confusing, this is difficult, and so on and so forth. And then the next question Neil would ask was, why is this so difficult? And this was a diagnostic question. You know, what are causing your difficulty? And sometimes the person can answer that. Sometimes they'd have to call some colleagues over. Sometimes it required more investigation. But it was exactly the clinician's trained behavior applied onto the work and not just patients. So then Neil asked one more question, which is, how should we treat the causes of the problems you're currently experiencing? And then with the same clinical discipline, and how do we follow up to see which changes are working and where we have to deepen our thinking and our understanding. Now, that's what Neil did the first few days directly to the people doing the direct work of patient care. He was chief medical officer of a very large academic medical center. He couldn't round everywhere every day. So what he started gradually doing after building up his own skill at this, he started asking the same questions, but of his chairs and his chiefs. And not surprisingly, at first when he asked these questions of chairs and chiefs, they did not have very particular answers about this. They might have very particular answers about the patients in the care of their units, in the care of their services, but but with some practice and some reinforcement of Neil asking these questions, what are you doing, what's going wrong, why is it going wrong, what should we do differently, the chairs and chiefs realized they needed to know. So they started asking the question of their fellows and their chief residents, who started asking these questions of their residents and their interns, who made this just part of their daily rounding practice, that when they rounded on patients and simultaneously rounded on the process. Now, again, for sake of time, let me just offer that having built this dynamic pattern of actively seeking problems at every level of the organization and actively trying to come up with explanations for those problems and solutions to those problems, the ability to deliver outstanding care at this institution went way up. Their capacity went way up, and the overburden on staff went way down. They succeeded in using this dynamic to deliver much more value more quickly, more easily than they had previously. So anyway, let me pause there, Brian, because I'm looking at we're at the top of the hour. I just want to see how you want to proceed from here.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. Absolutely fascinating. Lots of resonance with that last story as well. Steve, do you have 5 minutes tops to just enter into a bit of conversation here?
Absolutely.
Great. Gavin, I'm going to bring you back in. You're now unmuted. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, beautiful.
Oh, excellent. Steve, thanks for your talk. We once spent an afternoon together making paper airplanes in Florida.
I remember.
I think you partly. I was intrigued with your slide where you're really saying fix things in real time. Pick up the abnormalities, fix them in real time, and teach something. And maybe that was your answer to my question, which was, you're talking about high performers. What would be the first thing you would do in a healthcare organization that wanted to become a high performer?
Yeah, so I think the characteristic of great clinicians is an extraordinary amount of empathy for the patients who are under their care. And we've all had that experience either as a patient, or we've all had that experience observing a colleague who we understand that their concern for the patient is so terrific that they come up with a much better workup and assessment of the patient and a much more creativity in terms of generating treatment plans for that patient. It is very much similar in that expand the aperture of that empathy to the people with whom you work and the people for whom you're responsible, and look for the experiences they're having that diminish their sense of accomplishment on a day, and look for the experiences they're having that diminish their sense of satisfaction that the training they brought into the day, that the aspirations they brought into the day, the professionalism they brought into the day was put to good use. So,
and I totally agree with that. I suppose what I and others would sometimes see is that an organization that's maybe struggling a bit, the clinicians get very frustrated, and one of the first things that seems to go is their, I don't mean all their empathy, but that extra something that makes them great sometimes goes into hibernation because of their frustration with an organization that doesn't seem to be able to, maybe in their words, get its act together.
Yeah. So, Gavin, let me just end with one last point by channeling from bedside care of patients to treating the processes through which that care arises, is that I have friends and colleagues who deal with very, very complex patients, 5 or more comorbidities, 10 or more medications, that sort of thing. And one might think that you have to have super duper giant cognitive power to understand and treat a patient with such complexity. And the reality is none of us do. And so the approach that my colleagues who deal with such complex patients, the approach that they take is that they start with the first thing they can grab to stabilize and make better. And it varies patient to patient because these are patients who truly are unique. And they grab that one thing, and by grabbing that one thing, it makes it easy to grab the second and the third and the fourth, because they return, by grabbing one thing and getting some control over that, they add some resiliency, some stability to the patient so that they can move on to the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge. They kind of whittle away at the problem. And so I'm very sympathetic to those who are in these very large systems. It seems everything is wrong all the time, everywhere. And my encouragement is fix something. And I don't have a very strong prescription on what that is, but fix the thing that's chewing up your time. Because if you can fix something which returns time, it reduces stress and allows you more time to do other creative things, be it fixing things for patients or fixing other things in the system. So again, like I said, I want to both recognize and applaud the professionalism you all developed over many years of school and practice, and encourage you to do nothing more than expand the application of that professionalism onto the environment in which you work.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Thanks very much, Gavin. And Steve, with a number of comments just to say how your stories and your messages really resonated. We had some comments from Will Warburton, who's the Director for Quality Improvement at the Health Foundation around technology. And there's been a big report here. Bob Wachter, whom you'll know, has just completed a report in NHS England around health information technology and some of the unintended consequences in terms of clinician fatigue, etc. So we're learning a lot about what not to do in technology and perhaps better ways of doing it. Steve, we've come to the end of our time together. It's great to have had you with us for the last hour. We've got some resources to point QI connectors to, and I'm really grateful to you on behalf of the QI connector community. Thank you very much indeed. And Steve, if you could stay on the line just for a moment, we're just going to finish off by reminding QI connectors that we've got 3 further talks this year. That's a big surprise to you. You were expecting only 2 more. And we've actually got some changes in dates. So we've got Peter Lachman now on the 27th of October. We'll send out the times on that after this call. And we've now got an extra QI Connect for the first time ever from George Kerwin, who's the Chief Executive of Bellin Health, a high-performing health and care organization in the US. And then we'll finish off the year with Tim Brown and guests from IDEO and the design schools across Scotland. So we're squeezing quite a lot in this year, but absolutely delighted that we'll have Peter Lachman, who is now the Chief Executive of ISQA, and he will be joining us on the 27th of October, 4 to 5 p.m. And just to remind everyone, please follow us on Twitter. Thanks to all of our Twitterers, is that what you call yourselves? But to all the people on Twitter for sharing and learning together this afternoon. And with that, we'll say thank you very much indeed. And thanks, we'll see you in October. Thanks, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect. Have a great day.